So, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
This Shabbat we have a very special speaker or darshan, and that is Ben Kreshtool. And Ben is going to be speaking to us today about an important and sacred trip that he took with his family in September. Some of you may have thought he was at Canyon Ranch Spa, but in fact he is not. I believe legend has it that that his sister, perhaps, and maybe his mother had something important to do with this desire to take a legacy trip to Poland. And Ben went on this trip with his family and was able to have experiences that we were hopeful that he would share with us today. So with no further ado, Ben Kreshtool.
Thank you. Birshut Rabbanan, I'm grateful for your allowance of sharing your pulpit with me. Thank you so much. I thought it was appropriate that today, Parshat Noach, that we would talk about my trip to Poland. In Parshat Noach, we learn about how humanity became wicked and corrupt, and thus the world was destroyed. In 1939, humanity again became corrupt and wicked, and what was once a flourishing Jewish community also experienced total destruction, never to be the same again. Then it was 20 years ago that I first touched down in Poland, a place that I had heard about all my life. Poland was the place where my grandparents were born, the place where they grew up, the place where they lived, the place where they also lost everything. From the very beginning, I grew up knowing that my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. There was never a time in my life that I didn't know about the Shoah, what the Shoah was. I always knew. But still, Poland sort of remained this distant place, a place of memories, place where I had a family that I never would know, right, that I didn't know that I never would know. And it was also a place that my grandmother, of blessed memory, always said that there was nothing left for us there. Right? There was nothing left for us there. And so it was, in my mind, I figured I would never go there. Right? I would probably never visit. And then fast forward to 2004, my senior year at Bet Tefillah, the senior class always takes what is called senior seminar. And that trip, I think, has changed since then. But the core of it is you take a week in Poland, and then you spend the weekend in Prague, although I think that is no longer true anymore. And then you spend 5 or 6 weeks in Israel, right? So that first trip to Poland, I was there with my class. I was 18, and it was difficult. It was a difficult trip for me. I had sort of remembered Grandma's words that there was nothing left for us in Poland, and I wasn't really sure quite what to expect. And when you're there as an 18-year-old, you don't really have the emotional maturity to process that what you're seeing. And you're there with your classmates, and it's a different sort of vibe, heavily programmed. But still, it was difficult for me. And the truth is, they reward you at the end of it by sending you to Israel, right? The very best place on earth. And so we were all looking forward to that. And in my mind, I'd sort of pushed the sadness of Poland into the back of my mind. And apparently I did such a good job of this that the Poland that I arrived to recently, I did not recognize. It was a very different Poland that I came back to. But after that first trip, I had made up my mind that I would never go back. It was never my intention to go back to Poland. I did it, I went, and it was important, but that was it. We shouldn't have to go back to Poland ever again. Until the end of September, when I did exactly that. Only this time I did it with my mom, my brother, one of my 2 sisters, and about 15 other people in tow, a group from the Ramah Seminar Adult Journey. And it was a really interesting experience, and I'm grateful that I'm going to share three moments from that trip that really sort of impacted me in a way that I was not quite expecting. The trip lasted about 10 days, but I'm only going to focus on 3. If you want to talk more Kiddush, we can definitely do that, and if you want to see pictures, follow me on Insta. So, thank you. So the first moment I'd like to share is when we visited a shtetl called Tikoshin. Tikoshin is like a classic sort of shtetl. It's very much reminds me of like Anatevka. It sort of had half a Jewish population and half a non-Jewish population. This is very common in shtetl in Poland. And Tikoshin is sort of very reminiscent. It looks like nothing has changed since the 1930s. It's very typical shtetl. In the middle of the town, though, is a magnificent and beautiful synagogue. The synagogue, of course, was destroyed during the Shoah, but restored by Soviet artists in the 1950s, and you can kind of tell because painted on the walls are prayers, pictured, things like that, but there's some misspellings in the word there, so you might, instead of seeing the word chesed, you see the word chaser. Oops. So we'll give them a little bit of a pass. It's not their fault. They were working from photographs. But the synagogue is magnificent. A beautiful synagogue that is now a museum. Right? Like many places in Eastern Europe, synagogues that were destroyed by Nazis or the local population have been restored. And it reminds me, anybody ever read Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews? Yeah. So Dara Horn writes in her book, in that essay, that these Jewish heritage sites, that's the term she uses, are in places like Poland, Hungary, Germany, any place that Jews lived. The governments of those places, Poland has spent a lot of money restoring these places, restoring these synagogues, which, again, had usually been destroyed by the local population. They neglect to mention that, though. The beautiful synagogue was built in 1624, served the Jewish community until 1941, when the Jews suddenly just left the town, right? Just disappeared, right? And that was that, right? They build these museums to Jewish culture. They talk about the Jewish contributions of the people who lived in that area. But then when you leave, you sort of realize that, there's no more Jews left here, right? There's no Jews left. And nobody really ever asks to think what happened to them. I mean, why was it that these places are these museums? Why are synagogues museums? Synagogues as museums are something that make me terribly sad. But when we were there in Tikoshin, we used that synagogue actually to daven shacharit. And it was a really beautiful experience for the group, in our talit, in our tefillin, earlier in the morning, to be able to daven shacharit in this magnificent old synagogue, even among a group of Polish tourists, one of whom enthusiastically greeted us with a shalom, which I was immediately suspicious. And then the annoyed group of tourists who were annoyed because they couldn't get the perfect picture of the beautiful Aron Kodesh. But pushing them sort of out of the way to be able to breathe Jewish life into this ancient synagogue was a really beautiful thing. I firmly believe in taking old Jewish things, making them new again, using them. A synagogue that sits unused is depressing to me. And so the opportunity to be able to pray in this beautiful synagogue was really, really lovely. That synagogue served that community in Tikoshin until August of 1941, when the Germans rolled in and marched them all to the nearby Lupochova forest, where on August 25th they murdered all of the men, and the women and the children the following day on the 26th. We stood in that forest, in the Lupochova forest, the sunlight breaking through the trees, casting this beautiful golden light on the blood-soaked earth, illuminating mass graves where the 2,500 residents of Tikoshin breathed their last. These are the secrets that Poland's forests hide. Beautiful forest, almost all of them have this terrible secret. I was there, I stood there, I recited the special El Malei Rachamim prayer for victims of the Holocaust, and I cried. I am not an emotional person, generally speaking, but I cried. We continued in our journey after davening with Poland's chief rabbi to the city of Lublin, which, I don't know if anybody ever been to Lublin. It's a medium-sized city in Poland. It's a beautiful city. It's important to the Jewish community because it's an ancient Jewish community. It dates back to about the 16th century. It was a center of Hasidism, a center of learning. In fact, the hotel we were staying at is the former Yeshivat Chochmei Lublin, the yeshiva for the learners of Lublin. It was founded in 1930 by Rabbi Meir Shapira, whom some of you may or may not know is the founder of Daf Yomi. So that yeshiva is where Daf Yomi was born, this great center of learning, this great center of Hasidism. Lublin, very important, significant Jewish community. And one of my favorite things to do, two of my favorite things to do while traveling, if I'm with a group, I like to leave the group and then usually also to visit Jewish cemeteries. So I happen to know and learn that the Jewish cemetery in Lublin is an ancient cemetery, again dates back to the 16th century, and has a couple of sages that are buried there, but it wasn't on our itinerary. And I was saddened by this, so I asked our guides if it would be possible for me to visit the cemetery maybe before davening, earlier in the morning, like early in the morning. And for those of you who know, I'm not a morning person, but I was willing to do it so that I could visit these graves and visit the cemetery. It only cost me $5, about 20 zloty, to get the key to the cemetery. And my guide, Chris, and I, we went out together. He walked me there. It was about a 15-minute walk. And as you walk along the road of Lublin and many cities in Poland, if you look closely enough, you'll see stones embedded into the ground which mark the ghetto boundary of the Jewish area. And he also pointed out to me as we were walking how close the Jewish area was to the city's castle, so that the local government keep a close, watchful eye on the Jewish community, because, you know, anti-Semitism. So we got to the cemetery, and it's behind this like enormous church. There's like this tiny little nondescript brick wall. You wouldn't know it if you weren't looking for it. But the gate in it has a Magen David like in it. It's this beautiful little gate, charming. So I opened the gate of the cemetery, and this is when Chris tells me, he's like, oh, I have to go back to the hotel now because people are going to wake up soon. So I said, you know, it'd be fine. I'd probably be able to find my way back to the hotel, which of course was a mistake, but let's be ever grateful to Google Maps. It was ever to get me back. It was fine, but he left. He left me in the cemetery alone, completely alone. I was standing in the cemetery. The sun was rising. I was there by myself. And this cemetery too was destroyed by Nazis in 1942. Many of the stones, the matzevot, had been uprooted and taken away to be used in construction projects, most infamously in the road of the local concentration camp Majdanek. If you go, you'll see some of the remnants of those stones that are still embedded into the ground today. But they're, you know, as Nazis typically do, they leave like everything in a ruin, and a lot of cemeteries in Poland now are being reclaimed by forests because there's no one to tend to them, right? There's no one there to take care of them. So this cemetery looked very much like that. Half of it was sort of reclaimed by the forest. You can see the stones sort of poking out of the trees. Some of the stones are still upright. There was one in particular, a beautiful stone with like a beautiful deer etched on it. But some Hasidic organizations have repaved some of the area so that you can access the graves of two rabbis in particular. One is Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Horowitz, who is known as the Jose mi Lublin, the seer of Lublin, and Rabbi Shlomo Luria, who is also known as the Maharshal, a very famous rabbi who died in 1573, but like a magnificent halakha commentator. His grave was destroyed by Nazis. It's been since restored. So I was there specifically to pray at those graves. And again, I was completely alone in the cemetery by myself. The sun is rising and I'm there. And I went to pray specifically at these graves, and as I was doing so, I was sort of struck by the remarkable history that was sort of around me. You know, I was alone with my thoughts. I couldn't help but think about the total destruction of Poland's Jewry, not specifically just Lublin, but Poland in general. This community, which was vibrant, it was flourishing, it was beautiful, and it was just washed away like the flood in our parasha. So washed away in a flood of pogroms and hatred that left only scattered remains of what once was something so beautiful. And in that cemetery again, by myself, I cried. The end of the trip, everybody else decided to go home, and because our family is gluttons for punishment, we would stay one more day in Poland, a place to which I swore I would never go back. One more day in Poland, to visit the city of Częstochowa, which is the city where my grandparents came from. In the first trip when I went to Poland, I did not visit Częstochowa. Częstochowa was sort of this like mythical place in my mind that, you know, I had always heard about. My grandma had, you know, we talked always about Częstochowa, but I had never been there. And this was like the one thing on the itinerary that well, it wasn't really on our itinerary, but the one thing that was really very important for me to do was to visit Częstochowa, which is on Poland's western border, very close to the border with Germany, is a big Catholic pilgrimage center because there's a monastery in Częstochowa with like a magic picture inside. So it's not like a nothing city. Częstochowa is not a shtetl. It is a city. It's an actual city. And so I was looking forward to visiting it. And I never thought in my mind that I would actually be able to visit Częstochowa because, Grandma told us not to. And like I never thought that I would visit Poland. Like I never thought that it would be a thing. And then, after the first trip, I never thought I would go back. So I never thought that I would go. But my mom had been to Częstochowa before, but my brother and my sister and I had not. But we were there, and in my grandmother's later years, my mom convinced her to sort of write down her story in a journal. And in that journal, she left and talked about the early years in Częstochowa and also put down some addresses. And also my sister Alana, who's been very involved in Holocaust education, was able to do a little bit of research and find some other addresses where our family had lived. And we were able to go and sort of visit that. And I was anxious to visit these places in Częstochowa. And it was sort of surreal because I'm walking around Częstochowa visiting these places. The map I'm using, though, is a map of the ghetto. It's a map of the ghetto area. Częstochowa was divided into a large ghetto, a small ghetto, no wall. Częstochowa ghetto did not have a wall. So I'm using this old map to trace the ghetto area, visit these places where my grandparents lived, where they worked, where they lived, saw what they saw. And as we walked around the city, through the ghetto area, eventually you come to the Holocaust Memorial in Częstochowa, which is this brick edifice. It's got a big crack in the middle, and there's a Magen David and a couple of train tracks that are sort of like stuck onto this wall. It's a really beautiful memorial. And we stood there, and we were there on September 22nd of this year, and it was exactly 82 years prior, on that very same day, that the Jews of Częstochowa were sent to that very place and boarded up on trains and sent to Treblinka. They never came back. Right? So we were there at that spot on that very day where in 1942 all of Częstochowa's Jews were rounded up, and we were there on that same day, and it was again surreal to me because I didn't realize, like, I always say, what is time? Like, what is time? But in this moment, the time actually was significant and important for me. And again, I offered prayers to all of my relatives who did not come back from that journey to Treblinka. And finished up our day, though, in Częstochowa at the Jewish cemetery, where, again, as you might notice, many cemeteries in Poland now all are forests. They're all, not kept well because, again, no one there. But we went to visit the cemetery in Częstochowa, and in the back towards the wall, they've sort of redone some of it. Some of the monuments have been rebuilt. There's a monument to underground fighters, local Jewish underground fighters, large monument, grave of the rabbi who was there, although the bullet holes are still in there when they shot the local inhabitants to put them all in a mass grave. And there are several mass graves in the cemetery in Częstochowa, and one of them has a much newer monument on top. It's got names inscribed on the sides, and come to see that we knew that the names of my mom's grandparents, my great-grandparents, were inscribed on this wall. But it had always been understood by us that those people were taken to Treblinka during the action on September 22nd. But come to learn that that's not true at all, that our great-grandparents, my mom's grandparents, are actually buried in that mass grave. They didn't go to Treblinka. We come to learn that they had been shot in the ghetto, and they were sort of hastily buried in the ghetto, but then reburied in that mass grave in 1946. And my mom and I we were all kind of stunned by this information. And I asked her, I asked my mom, what she was sort of feeling, and she said something that I thought was quite profound. That there's a certain sense of comfort and a certain sense of peace knowing that, her grandparents were, one, at least buried in a Jewish cemetery, right? They lived in Częstochowa, they died in Częstochowa, they were buried in a Jewish cemetery, and they have a grave, right? There was somewhere to go and to visit, and that is not true for the vast majority of Holocaust victims. There is nowhere to go, there is no grave, there is nowhere to visit, there is nowhere to memorialize, and there's no names, right? There's so many places that don't have any names. And for us, this small, terrible bit of news did provide a small bit of comfort. And so this is sort of like the third thing that sort of for me was one of these very significant moments. So why did I do all of this and put myself in this emotionally vulnerable position, going back to Poland that I said I would never do again? It's for 3 reasons. The first, simple, important, we must bear witness. It is incumbent upon all of us to bear witness to the Shoah, the atrocities, to the horrors. If you get a chance to go to Poland, I would do it. One time only is all you need. Go if you can. I know the synagogue took a trip to Poland, Eastern Europe a couple years ago, and the people on that trip, I know it changed them. It was very meaningful. It's worth a visit one time. Secondly, I thought that it was actually important for me to go with family. This trip was originally scheduled for April of 2020, and then COVID happened, so we weren't able to go. And I was like, okay, so maybe we'll forget about it and never talk about it again, and it will be fine. But we did talk about it again, and it was so meaningful for me to be able to be there with my family because, to see those places, it wasn't just my immediate family that I felt a connection to. I felt a connection to generations before, to see those places, walk where they walked, see what they saw, touched where they walked, and these are links to a past, right? I'm a link in a chain that goes back not just to Poland, but also back to Har Sinai, right? The chain goes all the way back to Har Sinai. It's not just your immediate Jewish family, we're also part of a global Jewish family. I always say that, there's a microcosm. Whatever happens to the Jewish community as a whole also happens to families individually. So we're all sort of connected to that. And then the third reason was really for my grandmother, who, even though she always said that there was nothing left for us to visit in Poland, she didn't really understand why people would do that or go back because, terrible things. But a part of me thinks to myself that her soul wasn't really upset by our visit to Poland. Because my grandmother, despite everything, never lost her faith. In fact, the final words of the journal that she wrote was that being a Jew is the greatest privilege of my life. In spite of being a witness to the worst atrocities that a civilized nation has undertaken and fully executed, I am a Jew. And my grandmother, if she was able to hold on to her faith, despite everything that she saw, her family being taken away, never to be seen again, she believed every day was a gift. And so because of that sentiment, if not for her, I must hold on to this faith as well, but also I have to live it every single day. And that is the third reason why I went to Poland, because every day after her liberation, Grandma believed that was a gift from God. So I hope that, my trip to Poland maybe inspired some of you that you should go and visit yourself. And understanding that the end of the parasha this morning focuses very much on hope, right? Noah comes out of the teva, God's rainbow in the sky, a promise for a better world. We all can do better. And in our mind, in the terrible world that we're in now, it is our duty to be able to continue to make the world a better place, really do the work of Tikkun Olam, and bear witness to those atrocities so that they don't happen ever again. Shabbat Shalom.